today's lecture, I just want to give you an overview of the legislature, the rules that shape it, how it works, who it's comprised of, etc. So it's a bicameral legislature, like most, if not all of them in the United States. Bicameral means there are two chambers. There's a House and there's a Senate. And second, it's a little bit smaller than the United States Congress that you're maybe more used to. So in the Senate, there are 31 members, and those members are elected to 4-year overlapping terms. So every 2 years, half of them are up for re-election. And senators represent about 800,000, maybe closer to 1 million people per district. The House has 150 members, and they are elected to 2-year terms. So every representative in the House has to go through re-election every 2 years, every 2-year cycle. And that's just like the United States House of Representatives. They also have 2-year terms, so that's very similar. So the representatives in the House have smaller districts, of course. They each represent somewhere around 167,000 people. So there are no term limits for the U.S. Senate, for the Texas Legislature or for the U.S. Senate, either one. So you can represent your constituents in the House of Representatives or in the Texas Senate for as long as they keep re-electing you. And currently, the person who has served in the Texas Legislature for the longest amount of time is this woman, Synfronia Thompson. So she is 83 years old now, and she's been serving in the House of Representatives for 50 years. She was elected in 1972, and she took office in 1973, so right about half a century she's been in office. It takes you to a page where you fill out the address, and I meant to show you the results, but it looks like I got them out of order. Let me see if I can find, just a second, let's see. Where did I put them? I just have my pages out of order. Okay, so the Texas Legislature, one interesting feature about it is it only meets for 140 days, and it meets in January of every odd numbered year. So this is an even number year, 2022. The legislature is not in session. There are, I think, still committee meetings going on from time to time. I believe the House Ways and Means Committee just had a meeting a few days ago. But the legislature as a whole will not convene until January of 2023, which is very close. So they're getting ready to, they're going to have the elections in November, and then they'll meet in January for the next session. Now, Texas voters rejected annual sessions 5 times between 1949 and 1975. That means on 5 different occasions, there was a constitutional amendment proposed to switch us to a year, every year, having the legislature meet like most other states do, like the U.S. does, and it was rejected by voters every time. The legislature must adjourn at the end of the 140-day period. It has no power to call itself into a special session. So if on the 140th day there's still work to be done, it just doesn't get done. They have to leave, they have to go home, unless the governor calls them back into a special session. Then they can come back and keep working on something. But only the governor can do that.
What's the purpose of the meetings? Like they trying to pass a new law every time they meet?
Yeah, every time they meet, they pass 1,000 new laws or so. Every time, well, roughly. So membership statistics for the 87th legislature. This was the one that just finished a year ago. First, in terms of gender, you can see that it's about 2/3 male, about 1/3 female. In the House, it was 111 men and 38 women, 21 men in the Senate and 10 women. In terms of party affiliation, last time there was a slight Republican advantage in both chambers. You had 15 more Republicans than Democrats in the House. You had 5 more Republicans than Democrats in the Senate. Not a huge difference, but a majority in each place. In terms of incumbency, this is an important note. Notice how most of these people are incumbents. So only 16 freshmen were in the House of Representatives. Only 4 freshmen were in the Senate. So incumbency helps you to keep getting elected and reelected and so on. And last, in terms of age, notice that most of the representatives and senators are middle-aged. They're in their 40s, 50s, and then it starts to go down in the 60s. There are a few in their 70s. There's nobody over, 70 and over. Like I said, Sinfronia is 83. I think she's the oldest person in the House as well. But nobody under 30. And only 16 people under 40. So in order to be a senator, you're most likely going to be in your 50s. You're going to be well established. You'll have a career already as a lawyer or whatever it might be. And then you decide to go into politics. Salary and benefits. One interesting feature about Texas is that the members of the House and Senate are not paid very much. They're paid $7,200 a year.
7,000?
That's right. Plus a 190-day stipend while they're in session, $190 a day. Now, if you add all that up, they're in session for 140 days, $190 each of those 140 days, plus the $7,200. They can get $28,200 on the year when they're in session. So next year, but you think about it, $28,000 is hardly anything, right? It's
every other year, though.
Every other year, that's right. So what that means is these are not full-time lawmakers. They couldn't survive on that low of a salary, and that's on purpose. The reason that the Constitution designed it that way was so that they could not support themselves just by being politicians. They have to have other jobs. So most of them are lawyers, real estate agents, whatever it might be, but they do something else outside of this. Now, in addition to their salaries, they can accept, or they can use campaign contributions to pay reasonable household expenses in Austin. If you know anything about Austin, it's a very expensive place to live, so that can be a lot of money, and they can use campaign donations to pay for that, to pay for an apartment, I guess, or maybe rent a house, or whatever it might be. They can also accept gifts from lobbyists, and this can be pretty nice too. Lobbyists are limited to spending $500 on entertainment gifts, but if the lobbyist is present with the lawyer, the politician, there is no limit on how much money the lobbyist can spend. So what does that mean? The lobbyist can take them out to dinner, and the lobbyist will pay for everything. The lobbyist can take them on vacation, and the lobbyist will pay for everything. So they can get some pretty nice perks from these lobbyists, and it's perfectly legal according to the Texas laws. Last thing about their benefits, they do get retirement benefits. They can retire at 50 with 12 years of service, or at 60 with 8 years of service. The pension that they receive is $3,220 per year while they're in office. So the lady I mentioned earlier who's been in office for 50 years, if she chooses to retire, she is entitled to $150,000 a year pension just because she's been there for so long. But that's a very rare case, right? Usually they aren't there nearly that long. She doesn't seem to be interested in retiring.
Aren't you there till like you ready to stop working there?
Well, until the voters vote you out, yeah, or until you want to stop, right? But apparently she's very popular because she keeps getting reelected. Yeah. So the Speaker of the House is the most important person in the House of Representatives, and the current Speaker is this guy. His name is Dave Phelan. The Speaker is the presiding officer who controls all the legislation in the House. And it's one of the most powerful, one of the most important positions in Texas government. The Speaker is elected by the House members. So we don't pick the Speaker of the House directly, right? We only vote for our representative, and then they choose who's going to be the Speaker when they get there. Now, it's illegal for candidates for Speaker to formally promise other members something in exchange for their votes, but supporters often receive choice committee assignments. So informally, people who supported Dave Phelan and his campaign to become Speaker typically got nice committee jobs in return. Right? That's just the way that the House works. So he has lots of powers, lots of influential powers. One, he can appoint chairs of all committees, and he appoints most of the members of each standing committee. He appoints members of the calendar and procedural committees, the conference committees, and other special committees. And he refers all bills to committees. So these are powerful tasks. He can help you or hurt you in your career by giving you the committee membership you want or not giving it to you, right? If you've, angered the party somehow. And he can support a bill or kill it by putting it in the right committee or putting it in a committee where he knows it'll die or whatever. He is the presiding officer over all sessions, and he serves as a member of the Legislative Redistricting Board. That's a board that meets every 10 years to redraw the district maps in Texas. In the Senate, the presiding officer is called the Lieutenant Governor. Technically, he is a member of the executive branch, and he serves a 4-year term. But really, he is the president of the Senate. He is the leader of the Senate. So he presides over the Senate. He interprets its rules. He appoints all the chairs and selects all the members of the Senate committees. And he appoints members of the conference committees, and he refers all bills to committees. So he's the Senate version of the Speaker of the House, similar powers. And he also serves as a member of the Legislative Redistricting Board. So just like in the House, this person has a lot of power to decide which bills are going to go forward and which ones aren't, which senators are going to get which committee assignments. If you get elected to the Senate and you want a certain committee, then he's the person you have to convince to give it to you. There are generally two kinds of committees: standing committees and conference committees. So standing committees exist from year to year, right? They are permanent committees. Conference committees are created specifically to work out differences over legislation. So if a House bill and a Senate bill are passed, but they are different, there are differences between them, they create a conference committee just to iron out those differences. And the Speaker appoints the House members, and the Lieutenant Governor appoints the Senate members, and they solve the differences, resolve the differences. Here are the standing committees. You are not going to be expected to memorize these by any stretch, but it's possible that I'll have a question about one or two. But just to give you an idea of the kinds of committees there are. So in the Senate, it's a smaller body, so I have fewer committees: administration, border security, business and commerce, child protective services. I don't know what committee of the whole Senate does, probably rules. Constitutional issues, criminal justice, education, finance, select committee for the future of college sports in Texas, health and human services, higher education, jurisprudence, local government, etc. And then you have many of the same ones over on the right, but even more. So in addition to all those you saw in the Senate, the House has an agriculture and livestock committee. It has a calendars committee, which is very important. It decides what order bills go in or are put on the calendar for discussion. It has a select healthcare reform committee, energy services committee, and so forth. So all kinds of interesting committees. And if you click on one of these, I did just to play around with it and see what happens. If you click on any of these, what it does is it opens up into a new tab and it shows you all the members of the committees. And then if you click on one of those members, you can see all the other committees that that person is on. Because one person is usually on 4 or 5 different committees, not just one. Now I want to talk about the process of making laws and how it works. So there are a few different kinds of bills. There are revenue bills. These are bills for taxation, and they must begin in the House of Representatives. They don't start in the Senate. They start in the House. And all normal bills must pass both chambers to become law. So a normal lawmaking bill has to pass the House and the Senate to become a law. There's something called companion bills. This is when a member of the House and a member of the Senate file an identical bill at the same time. And to give you an idea how many bills are dealt with, the last year that I have data for is 2017, but there were 6,631 bills in the legislature, House and Senate combined, and 1,211 of them were passed. So you can expect the legislature to pass over 1,000 bills every year, and to consider, 6,000 or so every other year. And of all those that passed, the governor vetoed 50 of them. So the governor vetoes quite a few of these bills as well. Now, bills that pass and are to become law generally become effective on September the 1st of that same year. So in January, the legislature will meet. They will probably pass 1,000 bills or so, and those 1,000 will go into effect on September the 1st of 2023. Unless it's an emergency bill. An emergency bill becomes effective when the governor signs it. But in order to be considered an emergency bill, it has to get a 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate. And then you don't have to wait till September the 1st. An example of an emergency bill, a few years ago, I think it was 2017, Senate Bill 12 was passed to provide protective vests for police officers. And it got the 2/3 vote in both houses. So as soon as the governor signed it, it went into effect. It became law. There's also resolutions. There are 3 kinds of resolutions. Concurrent resolutions convey the sentiment of the legislature, and usually the governor has to sign them. So I'll give you an example of one of those. House Concurrent Resolution 31, this is a few years back, about 5 years ago, urged Congress to encourage the U.S. Department of Agriculture to revise its irrigation policies. So these are like suggestions or statements of the legislature's opinion, its beliefs. They're not new laws exactly. There's something else called a joint resolution, and these are used to propose constitutional amendments. And the governor does not have to sign them. There are simple resolutions. They do not need to pass both chambers, just one, the House or the Senate. The governor doesn't need to sign them. And simple resolutions are done for things like recognizing certain days. So one House resolution recognized February the 7th, 2017 as Community College Day. So it's not a new law, it's just a simple resolution. Now, constitutional amendments, remember I said they are joint resolutions, and they require a 2/3 vote of the entire membership in each house for adoption. And then they get sent not to the governor, but to the people of the state as a whole. And there's a referendum on them, or a vote up or down on the proposal. And if a majority of the Texans are in favor, it is ratified and it becomes a constitutional amendment. Budget and taxation follows a special process, a lengthy process that I'll probably get into in a specific lecture just on this subject. So, but a general overview, there's something called the Legislative Budget Board. They submit a recommended budget. The governor's office also recommends a budget. And then the Senate Finance Committee and the House Appropriations Committee get together to talk about the budget. Well, separately they talk about the budgets. And then when it passes the House and the Senate, it goes to the controller, not to the governor, and he has to decide if there's enough money to pay for the budget. And then finally it goes to the governor for a signature. But I'll go into that process in more depth later. Another power that the Texas legislature has is impeachment. It can impeach executive officials like governors or judicial figures, judges. And only 2 Texas officials have ever been impeached and convicted and removed from office. One of them was this man, Governor James Ferguson. He, in 1917, angered the legislature by vetoing its entire budget. And he did this because he was angry at the University of Texas. I think he wanted them to fire a professor and they wouldn't. And so he just vetoed the entire budget for the university. And not for the whole state, but just for that university. So he was going to cut off all their funding. And the legislature started impeachment hearings. They later found all sorts of corruption that he was accused of, and he ended up being impeached and removed from office. There was another case more recently. In 1975, a judge named O.P. Carrillo was impeached and convicted and removed from office for stealing money from the government, basically. Now, a little bit more about how bills become laws. So, I'm not going to follow this step by step, but when I put this online, you can look at it at your leisure, or I'll put a copy of it online as well if you want to just download your own copy of this chart. It's kind of a handy chart. But the overview. So once a bill has been written, it is introduced by a member of the House or Senate in that member's chamber. But remember, any tax bill has to start in the House. Anything other than a tax can start either way, House or Senate. Members of the House and senators can introduce bills on any subject during the first 60 calendar days of a session. If they wait longer than those first 60 days, it either has to be related to an emergency declaration declared by the governor, or they have to have a 4/5 vote of the members present in order to introduce a new bill. So the reason for that is to encourage the members to introduce their bills early in the session, in January or February. After a bill has been introduced, a short description of the bill called a caption is read out loud while the chamber is in session, so that all the members are aware of the bill and its subject, and that is called the first reading. And then the presiding officer assigns the bill to a committee, and the assignment is read out loud. So in the House, the Speaker would assign it to a committee, and the Senate, the Lieutenant Governor would assign it to a committee. So then it goes to the committee, and the chair of each committee decides when the committee will meet and which bills will be considered. This is a very important step. The committee chair is powerful because the committee chair can simply decide not to consider the bill at all, and then it's dead, and there's no chance of it passing. Now, public testimony will almost always be solicited on bills, so citizens can come and present arguments on different sides, in favor or against. And then after considering a bill, a committee may choose to take no action or may issue a report on the bill. So here again, the bill could die. The committee could have hearings and then decide we're not even going to issue a report. The bill is just going to die right here in the committee. If it issues a report, the committee report expresses the committee's recommendations regarding action on a bill. It includes a record of the committee's vote on the report, the text of the bill as reported by the committee. They can change the text. A detailed analysis of the bill, and a fiscal statement, a fiscal note. A fiscal note accompanies any bill that's going to require spending. It's required by the Constitution. It's an estimate of how much the bill is going to cost. So that has to accompany the bill as it proceeds forward. The committee process. So then a copy of the committee report is sent to either the Committee on Calendars in the House or the Senate Administration Committee. Excuse me, I misspoke. It's sent to the Committee on the Calendars in the House, and it's placed on the calendar. In the Senate, if it's a non-controversial bill, it's sent to the Senate Administration Committee. All the other bills are just done in chronological order, the order that they were reported on. But then you get to a really interesting feature of the Senate. There's something called a blocker bill, which is placed at the top of the Senate's daily calendar. And what it does, it forces a suspension of the regular order of business on every bill. So what I mean is, you're going to have something that might be called Senate Bill 1, and this is a blocker bill. It is introduced at the beginning of the year. It's the first thing introduced, and it's literally there to block all the other bills from advancing. If another bill is behind it, let's just call it Senate Bill 2, it can't be discussed and debated and voted on because this bill is in front of it and is blocking it. And you have to have a vote to suspend the regular order of business, and that vote is a 3/5 vote. So a senator will say something like, they use parliamentary language, will call for a 3/5 vote. If the Senate votes 3/5 of them in favor, then they will suspend the regular order and consider this bill out of order, and then now they can discuss it and debate it and vote on it and vote it yes or no. What does that mean? It means for realistic purposes, in order to get a bill passed and become law in the Senate, it has to be approved by 3/5 of the senators, not just a majority. It used to be even harder. It used to be a 2/3 vote, but about 9 years ago, they changed it to 3/5. They thought it would be easier to get legislation passed that way. So the bill then comes up for a second reading in the House or the Senate. It's read by its caption only, and then it's debated by the full chamber. Any member can offer an amendment to change the bill, but the amendment has to be approved by a majority of those present. They have to vote on the amendment, yes or no. Then they vote on whether or not to pass the bill. And then it is read a third time, and the third time it can be amended yet again, but they make it tougher. You have to have a 2/3 majority at the third reading in order to amend it. And then they vote one final time to see if they agree with it as it is or not. So if it receives a majority vote on the third reading, it is considered passed. After it is passed, they have a technical term. It is engrossed. And this means kind of the bill is, written up formally with all the amendments that have changed it, and it is handed over or presented to the other chamber. So now it goes from the House to the Senate or from the Senate to the House. In the next chamber, it repeats the same process basically. It goes through first, second, and third readings. It goes through committee process. So it repeats the steps. Now, I've already mentioned this concept. There are often differences between the two bills when they emerge from the House and the Senate. If there are, then you have a special conference committee appointed. There are members of the House and members of the Senate. Either in it, 5 members from each House, appointed by the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor. They reach an agreement. They iron out the differences. They send the agreement back to the 2 chambers, and the 2 chambers vote on it, yes or no. They can't make any more amendments. They just have to vote yes or no on whatever the conference version is. If it emerges from the House and the Senate and the conference version is approved of, if there was one, it finally goes to the governor. The governor has 10 days to act. He can sign the bill or he can veto it. If he doesn't do anything, then it becomes law automatically at the end of those 10 days. If he vetoes it, it goes back to the House or Senate, it goes back to the legislature, and they can override the veto, but only with a 2/3 vote. Now at this point, there's a special feature of Texas, how Texas's government works, that makes the veto a very, very powerful tool for the Texas governor. Almost always, the laws are passed at the very end of the session, and they are presented to the governor, and then the legislators go home. And so if the Texas governor vetoes it and sends it back to the House, they can't override it because they're gone. And so effectively his veto is final many of the times, right? Much of the time. One other little twist, if you've ever heard of something called the pocket veto, it doesn't exist in Texas. The pocket veto exists for the United States government. With the pocket veto, if at the very end of a congressional session in Washington, Congress passes a law and Congress goes home, and the President of the United States does not sign the law, it is considered vetoed. But that doesn't work here. In Texas, what I said earlier, if the President doesn't sign it or veto it, we assume that it becomes law, right? Automatically. This is another chart just showing you the whole process. I will put it on Canvas so that if you find it helpful, you can look at it, print it out, whatever you want to help you kind of remember these steps. Now I want to talk about one last thing. One really interesting feature of Texas government and the United States government is really similar in both governments, is something called the filibuster. So the filibuster has to do with that blocker bill. Well, no, it doesn't. It's similar, but it's not the same. I shouldn't have said that. That's confusing. It has to do with a special feature of the Senate, a rule or tradition going back now almost 200 years. And the basic gist of the rule is a senator is allowed to debate a bill for as long as he wants or she wants. And as long as the senator holds the floor and keeps talking, no senator can stop him or her. And it's just considered one of the privileges of being a senator. It started in the US Senate, and Texas has the same thing. And the idea behind it was initially the idea that you wanted to encourage debate and allow senators to debate for as long as they wished. And then it became an important tool that senators in the minority could use to slow down passage of bills they found really repugnant and force the whole Senate to kind of talk about it and consider their objections. So some aspects of the Senate. There are rules that the Senate has, not laws, but rules that they've adopted themselves about how filibusters are supposed to work. So one rule says no eating or drinking in the chamber. And another rule says that a senator must stand at his or her desk to address the Senate. The senator cannot sit, lean, or use a desk or chair in any way, and cannot take bathroom breaks. If the senator is speaking and other senators want to ask a question or raise an objection, they can do so, but that doesn't take the floor from the senator. And you'll hear them talking to each other. If you ever watch one, someone will say something like, "Senator, may I ask a question?" And he'll say, "I yield for a question," meaning I keep the floor, but I'll listen to your question. If someone thinks that the senator has violated the rules of the filibusters, they can raise a point of order. The senator will be warned after a third violation, like I guess a third bathroom break or whatever. Then the filibuster is over, the senator loses the floor, and business resumes. This is a picture of one of the most famous filibusters in Texas history. I want to talk about it in a minute. So just for the record, the longest filibuster in Texas history was conducted by this man. He was named Bill Meyer. He recorded a 43-hour filibuster in 1977. He objected to a provision of a bill which would have prevented public inspection of the records of the Industrial Accident Board. So there was a board in Texas. He wanted public access to, or public inspection of its records, and some bill was going to take that away, and he felt so strongly about it that he spoke for 43 hours. Now, technically the rules say no bathroom breaks, no sitting, leaning, or standing. I remember watching an interview of the lieutenant governor from 1977. He said he liked this guy. He didn't agree with his filibuster, but he liked him and he wanted to let him talk for as long as he wanted to talk. So he allowed him to keep 1 foot in the Senate chamber and 1 foot in the bathroom and then pee into a pot and relieve himself that way and keep talking. But basically he had to talk for 43 hours. According to the Legislative Reference Library, there have been over 100 filibusters in the last 72 years. So a little over two per session, I guess is what the rule would be. No, 1 per session. I said that wrong. About 1 per session. So I think the most famous, and definitely I think the most interesting filibuster in Texas history is this one I referred to a few minutes ago. These are Senators Henry B. Gonzalez and Abraham Chick Kazin. They were from South Texas. Gonzalez was from San Antonio, and Kazin was from Corpus Christi. And they filibustered for about 36 hours in 1957. It was a tag team thing. Kazin spoke for about 15 hours, and then Gonzalez took over and spoke for 21 more hours. And what prompted them was they were standing up against segregation bills. So if you remember, hopefully you remember, in 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education decision said that racial segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. Well, a lot of states tried to get around that through laws that circumvented the decision, giving school districts ways to avoid it and stay segregated. And some legislators in Texas introduced about 10 laws like that. I won't go into the details of them, but they were just ways to stay segregated. So Gonzalez and Kazin were opposed to those laws. They were trying to prevent them from being passed. They had some help from other senators who were on their side. One technique that other senators will use to help you if you're filibustering is they'll ask you questions. And the questions will be really, really long and designed to give you a chance to rest your voice. and to physically rest. So for example, a senator from Austin named Charles Herring asked Gonzalez a question, and it took him an hour and 15 minutes to ask the question. And the whole point of it was really not to ask a question, but to give Gonzalez a chance to rest. Right? Public support, public opinion seems to have been overwhelmingly in favor of the two senators. I was pleasantly surprised to read that. While they were talking, people sent them hundreds of telegrams, flowers. Someone even sent them a money order and said, buy yourselves coffee and donuts, but they're not allowed to eat or drink, so they had to wait until afterwards. They only got 2 telegrams complaining about their filibuster each, 2 for Kaiser and 2 for Gonzalez. So at least the people who cared enough to tell them what they think supported what the 2 guys were doing. Eventually, they managed to win a partial victory. So there were 10 bills that were proposed, and 8 of the 10 bills were killed in order to get them to shut up and cede the floor and allow the Senate to resume its business. The other side agreed to withdraw 8 of the bills that they were opposed to. And this got nationwide attention. It made Gonzalez in particular, because he did slightly more of the talking, it made him a well-known figure for this. He got written up in Time magazine, I think, because of it. So that's it for today. I'll see you next time. Make sure you do your reflection assignments before you go.